Hey guys, welcome to another episode of NetSec Now. Today we're going to get into discussing exploitation, the third phase of the phases of network security and penetration testing. So let's start off with a disclaimer. Any information disclosed in this series is provided for the sole purpose of learning network security. We take no responsibility for any misuse of any information we provide. We only suggest you audit the systems you have permission on or otherwise in your lab. Moving forward. So the phases of penetration testing, right? We went through it. The first phase was information gathering, doing your homework. We made a video on that, so if you haven't seen that, go ahead and check that out first. The second video we made was the recon stage, building a case. And of course, again, if you haven't seen these videos, guys, go on the YouTube channel and check them out. Today we're going to be discussing, as I said, the access and exploitation bombs away phase. Some of the things we're going to be using we'll get into here in just a minute. So let's talk about the types of different attacks for exploitation. There's a remote attack, a client-side attack, a blind-side attack, social engineering attack, a fuzzing and denial of service attack, and man-in-the-middle attacks. So you might be asking yourself, why so many different attacks? Well, I'm going to explain just the top three here because that's what we're going to actually be getting into today. Actually, we'll be getting into the top two, but I'm going to explain the blind-side attack as well. So the remote attack is basically you're trying to exploit services that are vulnerable, that are remote services, something like NetBIOS or DNS or something to that effect. A client-side attack, on the other hand, is something that you're trying to exploit client-side wise, a vulnerability in Java, Flash, things like that. And that kind of ties into the social engineering attack with like the social engineering toolkit, which we will be making a whole separate video on as well. So, the blind-side attack is an attack that I don't generally recommend using unless you are absolutely at the end of your rope and you are desperate to try to get in, or you just want to make sure that you've covered all bases, right? So a blind-side attack is basically firing everything in your toolkit at your target and hoping for something to allow you in, okay? Blind-side attacks are very, very noisy. Blind-side attacks can cause system damage, downtime, or server system crashes, things like that. So I don't generally recommend that unless it's a last-ditch effort to try to get in to your client's network. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about some of the tools that we're going to be using in this episode. We're going to be using Metasploit and Armitage. Armitage being the front-end GUI version for Metasploit. Now, Armitage is very limited in some aspects. I've actually recently, if you've been following us on Facebook, I posted on that. I found a bug inside of Armitage when you're using psexec and pass to hash attacks. It actually will work, but it doesn't show the target system as being compromised inside of Armitage. However, if you emulate and do the exact same thing in msfconsole, which is the command line version of working with Metasploit, you will actually see that it does in fact open a second interpreter session, and it does work. So we're going to be learning also msfconsole because it's really good to have the core fundamental understanding of how Metasploit actually works. And again, if you run into bugs with Armitage or something you're just not sure is working correctly, you can always go back to msfconsole and then you could do it in there and see if in fact it does or does not work. The old school manual compile and fire, basically, we're not going to get into that today. I try to stay away from that. That's mostly if you find private exploits that haven't been made public yet. Really, you got to trust the person you're downloading the script from, and then you have to compile it. So if you can't read the code of whatever language they wrote it in, you're kind of taking a crapshoot on whether or not it's actually bad for your system as well as maybe utilizing some sort of attack for the remote system. So, social engineering toolkit, we're going to actually make a video separately based upon just the social engineering toolkit, or otherwise known as SET inside Kali Linux. Cobalt Strike, that's like, it's made by the same guy, Raphael Mudge, that made Armitage, but it's a paid version. It is quite expensive. We went over that in the past. So we're really actually not going to be getting into that or using that, even though I believe there's a 14-day free trial on this website. We're not going to get into using that. So denial of service attacks, guys, you're probably never going to use that against your clients when you're doing this professionally. There is rare occasions where you might find a vulnerability where it requires you to fuzz or denial of service attack one service or part of a service to get around whatever protections in place and gain the actual access or information you're looking for, albeit very rare, very rare. Google finding vulnerability feed sites. There's sites like Security Focus and NIST.gov, things like that. We actually have one on our website, learnnetsec.com, on the front page there on the bottom right. So also there's various other tools, miscellaneous tools in Kali that you might be using. Really it depends on what type of audit you're doing. Each client is going to be different. It's never going to be a set standard of, hey, well, this works every time, so I'm going to use this every time, and talking about exploits and things like that. So there's miscellaneous tools for information gathering, stuff like that, which we've went over in the other videos. So we're going to fire up our Kali Linux box here. Okay, so in the last video we showed you how to use OpenVAS, NBT scan, and some other tools inside there. Today we're going to be using Metasploit and Armitage, and then we're going to be doing msfconsole if I can fit that into this video. If not, I will make a separate video just based upon msfconsole. It is pretty intense to get used to the syntax of commands and how they work, so that might be in a separate video. Depends on how long this one runs. So we'll start off with Metasploit and Armitage because that's the easiest to gather. Okay, so the first thing is first. Our network has changed a little bit since the last video. IP addresses may have changed, things like that. So you want to go ahead and do an NBT scan again. You want to do an Nmap scan again. And then I'll show you how to import your Nmap scans and stuff like that inside of Armitage. So I've already went ahead and done the Nmap scans and the NBT scans to find out what the alive hosts were. So we're going to go ahead and actually fire up Armitage right now. So you go to the Applications menu, go to the Kali Linux submenu, and then down towards System Services, go to Metasploit, and then Community Pro Start. Now, if you haven't already, you have to register for the free serial key for the community version. Just go ahead and do that. We have actually mentioned that in the video of setting up Metasploit and Armitage. Please go back and reference that video and check it out. So the reason why we do it this way is it's a little bit easier than, starting a bunch of services. As you can see here, it starts 3 services in particular. Alright, so the next step is just to enter in the command Armitage and hit enter. So that's going to start the Armitage front end. The first dialog box that you're going to be presented with is actually the login box to get to the database, to connect to the database, the PostgreSQL database. And that should come up here in just a second. There we go. So just go ahead and click connect. Everything should be fine there in terms of username and password. It's going to ask if you want to start the RPC server. Go ahead and click yes. And don't worry about this connecting to localhost 55553 connection refused. It's actually just trying to establish its connection. It may take a minute, maybe 30 seconds, but eventually it will start Armitage as a service. And Armitage, I believe, is written in Java, so with Java, you know that there is some lag inside the application itself. And there we go. It says connecting to database, and it's going to go ahead and start Armitage as a front end. So I'm probably going to have to clear out our database here because I was doing some testing when I found the bug inside Armitage, so I just want to start fresh with you guys. So I'll go ahead and do that here in just a second as soon as it comes up. To clear a database at any time, guys, just go to the hosts menu at the very top here and just go down to clear database, and I'll show you how to do that in msfconsole as well, and just click yes. Okay, so basically we want to start fresh with importing our Nmap scan, and I'll show you how to do that. Now there's a couple of different ways that you can actually import hosts into Armitage, and I'll show you how. At the very top here, click hosts. Now you can go to import hosts, which is what you would do if you were importing something from like Nmap or some other scan you did. You can go to add hosts, which pops up a box and you can add 1 host per line. I don't really recommend that unless you're scanning just one particular IP address, but I don't actually ever use that. The other option you can do here is an Nmap scan. Now Metasploit itself has an Nmap module built into it, right? I prefer to do my Nmap scan separate because if I need to do a specialized type of scan, at least I can specify that in the command line parameter flags. but in here you could actually choose intense scan plus UDP, intense scan all TCP ports. It can be quite a bit slower when you do it in Armitage, so be aware of that. So if you want to go ahead and just do an intense scan, it's going to ask you to enter in your IP address or range. So if you had one single IP address, if you were doing a remote audit, you would go ahead and just enter in the WAN address of your client. If you were doing an internal audit here, of course, you can go ahead and enter in your IP address range, 192.168.1.0/24, and you can enter that in here. I'm actually going to cancel out of this. If you also notice that sometimes when you open up dialog boxes, there is no cancel or close button on some of them. Just right click on it and go to close. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and import our Nmap scan. Alright guys, so as I said, let's go ahead and import our scan here. So in order to do that, you have to go up to hosts, import hosts. Now if you remember in the last video, we tried to keep an organizational structure going, and we put all of our clients' information, scans, etc. into their own folder, right? So if we remember correctly, that was in Acme Inc. So just simply go to navigate in there, and my fresh scan that I did since the network has changed has been fresh-scan.xml. So just go ahead and highlight that and click open. And you can see here on the bottom there's a console, and then each task that you do opens up another tab. So in fact, this one is called import because we're importing. Now if you notice, it'll tell you that it successfully imported the freshscan.xml. Okay. Now you can see here it kind of looks cluttered because everything's stacked on top of each other, right? So we just go to auto layout, right click in the empty space here, go to auto layout, click none. Then go to layout and just click stack. That's the one I like best. Alright, so let's pick apart some of the information that's imported here. So obviously I did a range scan or a CIDR scan in Nmap as we did in the last video. So .1.1 I know is the router. So in order to make things a little bit simpler to understand, I'm going to go ahead and right click on this one and just go to host and remove host, as I don't want to waste time scanning things that I don't want to scan. So once that happens here, now again, like I said, Armitage is a little bit slow. Okay, so 1.3 I believe is my machine here, and let's just double check that. Yeah, 1.3 is this machine here, and I have no interest in scanning my host machine that I'm doing these videos off of, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove this one here as well. Okay, so now we have 3 hosts, alright, and if you highlight over each one of them and just run your mouse over, it's going to tell you what it is. So 1.2 says it's Microsoft Windows 7, and if you highlight over this one here, it says Microsoft Windows 2000. Well, I know there's not a 2000 box up on there. So then you highlight over this one, it says Microsoft Windows XP, but that's pretty vague, right? It didn't really give us too much information. I want to know what service packs are in there. I want to know, all that good stuff. And while Nmap will generally tell us that, the import feature in Armitage seems not to transfer all that information over, okay? So in order to do that, I want to do all 3 hosts at once. And there's another scan in Armitage called msfscan. Now, this is part of the auxiliary part of the scanners, which we will explore a little bit in msfconsole. So you go to hosts here and then msfscans. It's going to do a more detailed host-based analysis of what the machine actually is. Now you could also go to nmap scan and quick scan OS detect, but that may or may not work correctly. So in order to do that, you just left click anywhere and drag the imaginary box here, the highlighted blue box, over all 3 hosts. Sometimes all 3 hosts do not have the green box around them. So just try to do it again. There we go. So now all 3 hosts are selected, and I want to go to hosts, msfscans, and you can see it automatically populates the IP addresses that I'm looking to scan. And I'm just going to click OK. Now this can take a few minutes, guys, because it's scanning all these different ports for services that are running on them, so on and so forth. It's going to try to guess the operating system more directly and try to make a better accurate determination of the operating system. Again, you can achieve these same results in Nmap, but if you're going to use Armitage, which I don't really use it very often, but if you're going to use it, it does help to have as much detailed information in it as possible. So you can see here now it's running through our auxiliary scanners, and this is down here what you'll see in msfconsole when you go to set and use different things. Now you can see that the one that said Windows 2000 has actually changed, and it says Microsoft Windows XP Service Pack 3. Now you can see that this one here, if you highlight over it, says Microsoft Windows 2003 Service Pack 0. What that one was reporting as XP before, and this one was reporting as Windows 2000, right? So now we got a clear picture of what we're actually working with here. Now I know 1.9 is statically set for that Windows 2003 Standard Edition server in our VM box, our Proxmox virtual machine host server. Okay, so this Windows 7.1 or Windows 7.1 has not changed, so that's good. Alright, so now we got our hosts in here. We know exactly what we're looking at. If at any time you want to right click on any one of these and go to services to see what services are going, you can go ahead and do that. So you can see here on 1.9 we got DNS running on port 53, and it'll try to do a banner grab, a rudimentary banner grab, and tell you what's running on it. We have port 80 open on there as well, Microsoft ISS 6.0. Port 88's Kerberos security or server time. Port 135 is Windows RPC. Then we look at 139, well that's NetBIOS. LDAP is running on it. SMB, which is 445. Now, when you're doing an audit, and if you're like already in the network, and we'll get into that in post exploitation and in our advanced series as well, but port 445 is a dangerous port to have open. Unfortunately, there's not too much you can do about that when you're local on a network. Okay, there's a lot of exploits that work on that port for these older versions of Windows, like 2003 Server, Windows XP, and even sometimes Windows 7. So then you have kpassword, Windows RPC over HTTP, and then TCP wrapped. Okay, so if you wanted to find out what services are running on this Windows XP machine, same thing, right click on it, go to services, and you can see this one's really just running 139.445, so it's just NetBIOS stuff. Okay, Windows 7, same thing. Now if you notice, every time you do a task it opens up another tab down here. Now, this can get really confusing and really annoying when you have maybe 20 tabs open or something like that. So if you find the information you're looking for as you're going through, you can uncheck or delete some of these tabs by just clicking the X up here. So we know we imported our stuff already, we don't need that anymore. And we know we did our scan already, so we don't need that tab anymore. So now we just have our services open for each of the 3 boxes. So now you might be asking yourself, well, that's all great, but when are we going to get into the exploitation? Well, here's where we come into it. So if you remember correctly, we did in the last video, in the recon stage, we did the OpenVAS scan, whatever you call it. Now, if you remember looking in that PDF, there were some ports open and some services and some warnings and things like that. So you use that as a reference guide to try to build your case against what exploit you want to fire at what machine. Now, keep in mind, the way that Metasploit works and the way that Armitage works is that it kind of goes by what port is open and what service is running on that port. So while we may have port 445 open over here on the server, it may be patched already against that vulnerability, right? So you have to keep that in mind, that if an exploit doesn't work right away, it may be patched. They may have done their Windows updates, but a majority of the time they don't do system-wide updates across the whole entire network, or maybe they're doing the updates but a machine failed and they have no idea that the machine failed to do the update for whatever reason, so you can find a vulnerable target. Now again, you don't want to just go off and blindly fire everything. Now when I was talking about the blindside attack, in terms of using Armitage to do something like that, you have to go to attacks and then Hail Mary. And what that means is basically it's going to fire everything in the exploit database at that target system. Okay, it's very noisy, it can cause systems to crash, and you definitely don't want to do that to your client, right? Okay, so the first things first, you want to find attacks on a machine. So you want to find what's vulnerable, right? So if you just highlighted one machine here and you just go to attacks, find attacks, it's going to go ahead and query all the exploits in the database according to the services and ports that are running here, and it's going to try to determine maybe what exploit could be used for that port and that service. Now you can see here when it says attack analysis complete, you will now see an attack menu attached to each host in the target's window. So click OK. So if you right click now on the host, you can go to attack, and it's going to list a bunch of different things. So there's an MS03 026 DCOM, HTTP, this is a bug inside Armitage that I've let Raphael know about in the past. It still hasn't been fixed yet for whatever reason. You can't have something like, if you went to, let's go to DCERPC exploit. There's some exploits that support a check function, and what it does is it doesn't actually fire the exploit against the target. What it does is it checks the target to see if it's vulnerable to that specific exploit in hand. And then this menu only has one. But if you went down to IIS, you can see that it has 3 or 4 of them, right? 4 of them. So if you hit check exploits on this, it's going to run each exploit itself and try to use the check function. Now you'll see some of them here say this exploit does not support check. So some exploits that were built and verified and put into Metasploit do not support a check function. So unfortunately, on some of those you're going to have to manually fire them and just see. But we're looking for stuff that says, you know, this target is vulnerable or this target is exploitable. So you can see on this one here, the IIS MS0307 NTDLL WebDave module, it did do the check, and it says the target is not exploitable. So we know that right off the top there, the MS03, if we went to attack and then IIS, so the MS03007 we're not going to use, right? We know that right off the bat. Then this one here, IIS MSADC, says the target is not exploitable. So again, if we went to attack and then IIS and then down here, we know that it's not vulnerable to that one. So there are ones that said, like I said, exploit does not support check. Well, the IIS webdave upload.as or _ASP. So let's go ahead and try to fire that one, right? So attack IIS and then the IIS webdave, if that's the correct one, yes. So let's go ahead and click that to fire this exploit. Now this is actually going to really push the exploit towards the target and see. Okay, so once you do that, it opens up a dialog box here and it gives you some options. Now, not every exploit gives you these options. Some have options automatically picked for you by default. You are free to change whatever you'd like. So, targets automatic. I usually leave that in automatic. Sometimes it has other options here, which we will see later on, where you can choose a specific operating system or service to target. This one's automatic. I try to leave it on that if it has that, because it will run through it automatically and try it. Now, in order to, using a reverse connection, what that means basically is that whatever payload it's going to use to send to the target once the exploit is passed, and then it comes back to us to pick up the payload, we can try to use a reverse connection like a reverse TCP, reverse DNS, or a bind TCP, bind DNS, things like that. And we will get into that when we're using msfconsole. I will show you the differences. You also have an option here is called Show Advanced Options, and if you check that, now our options menu has changed. Before we get into changing any options, let's go ahead and take a look at the very top here. If you read this, it says this module can be used. It just gives you a brief overview of what this exploit is actually about. This module can be used to execute a payload on IIS servers that have the world writable directories. The payload is uploaded as an ASP script using a webdave put request. Okay, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. lhost is your local host, which is your machine that you're attacking from, right? So I know that this is the IP address of my Kali Linux box, and I can simply go ahead and find that out here by just issuing the ifconfig command, right? So this is our IP address. So we know that that's correct. Let's minimize this. Okay, so L port, you can leave this or you can change it. If you want to change any of these options under the value or the right hand tab here, you can do that. Let me just close this out here and restart this. Again, Armitage is a little bit buggy, so sometimes you have to kind of do things twice. Okay, so the L port you can see is changed. If we wanted to change this, you left click on it once to highlight it in blue, and then on the right hand panel here you left click it again. Sometimes you have to do it 2 or 3 times until you have a cursor in the box, as you can see. So if I want to change this to, you know, .1 or 25.721, I could, but I'm just going to leave it at the default. You could change the path if you wanted to. I don't recommend doing that. Proxies. Now, you could use proxy chains to do this. However, inside Armitage, it is a little bit buggy to use proxies. When we get into msfconsole, I will show you how to set global proxies to use proxy chains. And proxy chains is something we've discussed over a couple of videos. And so, applying that to using Metasploit with that, you can actually set up like an SSH pivot or a pivot through machines, things like that. You can use proxies to attack from, so on and so forth. Our host obviously is remote host, and that's the target machine that we're after. And of course that was automatically selected because that's the machine that we're targeting. Our port is 80. You can leave this unless IIS is running on another port like 8080 or something like that. You would change it in here again doing that. vhost, you don't have to really worry about vhost on most of these. And show advanced options again. You can change the domain name. Now, we should have known that if you did like an MBT scan or something like that, or even an Nmap scan, it's going to tell you what domain it's actually running on. Alright, so if we wanted to do that, you could. Alright, but you should have this knowledge at hand first, and before anything. So I'm actually going to change this option here, workstation, and I'm going to name this to the domain that it's working on. So it's acmeinc.local. Okay, so there's other different options you can change in here. I really don't generally change most of this stuff. I kind of just leave it the way it is, unless of course we're using proxies. But again, I don't really use professionally Armitage very much. So I'm going to always want to try for a reverse connection, right? Because I don't really want to try a bind attack. I want to try a reverse connection. So let's go ahead and check that and click launch. As you can see here, it opens up another tab, an exploit tab, and it says exploit running as background job, started reverse handler on the IP address of our machine here. Okay, uploading the bytes to whatever text file it's creating here. Upload failed, 403 forbidden. So that means that it doesn't have it's not really vulnerable because it doesn't have the post option as we saw in the description of the actual exploit. It doesn't have post enabled on that specific service. Okay, so that exploit pretty much failed. Okay, so the other thing you could do if you notice that you have a vulnerability that's been known to work on this specific service pack, so on and so forth, that you're pretty confident it's going to work, like an MS08067 for instance. You can always search for that in this box. Now let's say you went to OpenVAS and you did your scan and you were like, hey, it's vulnerable to MS08067, but instead of going through the attack menu here and trying to find each one of those, MS08067, so on and so forth, you can actually always search for it in here, MS08, and it'll bring up anything that starts with MS08, right? So you can see that MS08067 is down here. There's an MS08078, so on and so forth, right? And this is all browser-based stuff. And you can see the directory tree is auxiliary, exploit, and that's pretty much it that comes up in MS08. But if you erase this, you can see that there's 4 directories in here. Auxiliary, which is going to be most of your scanners, fuzzers, things like that, and brute force attackers. Exploit's going to be where all your exploits are actually loaded into, and your payload directory is going to be where all your payloads are into. So if you expanded this in the payload directory, you can see that it has a bunch of different subdirectories in there as well. So if we were working with this Windows machine here, we can go through here, we can use, there's add user payload, the Meterpreter is the really popular one that most people use, and you can see in here, if we just move this menu over a little bit, there is a bunch of different things in here. Bind IP version 6 TCP, bind no NX TCP, bind TCP, reverse TCP, reverse HTTPS. I mean, there's a bunch of different stuff in here, right? Reverse TCP DNS, all that good stuff. All right, so those are all your Meterpreter sub shells in here, and these are all of your Windows payloads as well. Okay, so if we went into the post directory, again, you can go under Windows, and you can go under the various. Now, post is for like post exploitation, which we are going to get into that in the next video. So again, let's not get too ahead of ourselves here. Let's go ahead and say that MS08067 under attack, and if we went to SMB MS08067, well, let's go ahead and check all the exploits here, because we want to know which ones are actually going to work, which ones aren't, so we're not guessing and wasting time. Let's go ahead and do that. Oh, here we go. So we can see, and we'll just wait here for the results to come by because the screen scrolls pretty fast. And again, some of them don't support check guys, so you're really going to have to just manually fire that one off at them. Okay, so let's scroll up here. The very first one it tried was MS08-067 Net API. Very common, very popular in the Windows XP, Windows 2000, Windows 2003 server world. Okay, there was patches for it in various service packs. Microsoft Windows XP was vulnerable all the way up to Service Pack 3, and an additional couple of updates that actually patched that. So anytime it says a target is vulnerable, well, we know that we can fire that exploit against a target in confidence that it's more than likely 9 out of 10 times going to work. Okay, now there is some false negatives and positives that are reported back like with any other tool. So we scrolling down here, we notice the rest of them don't support check, but we know that one's vulnerable. Let's go ahead and actually fire that one off. So right click on it, go to attack, and the menus are kind of a little finicky when you're putting your mouse on it, so sometimes you have to do it twice. So go back down to SMB, and you can see that it says, and we'll be getting through this in the msfconsole part of this, use Windows SMB MS08067. Now that's what you would do in msfconsole. Right click, go to attack again, SMB, and then choose MS08067 Net API, because we know that that one, according to the check option, is vulnerable. Let's go ahead and click on that. So let's just read briefly what the actual description of this exploit is. It says this module exploits a parsing flaw in the path canonicalization code of net API 32.dll. Well, sometimes in these descriptions it'll tell us what the targets are that are actually vulnerable. So reading down here a little bit, the correct target must be used to prevent the server service along with a dozen others in the same process from crashing. Windows XP targets seem to handle multiple successful exploitation events, but 2003 targets will often crash or hang on subsequent attempts. So you pretty much on Windows 2003 server, you only get one shot at this, right? So you have to make it count. If for some reason you set something wrong, something gets messed up, guess what? It might crash, and then when you try to run the exploit again, it might not be vulnerable to it. Okay, so it might crash that service. So it's just giving you a heads up to watch out for that. This is just the first version of the module, full support for NX bypass on 2003, along with other platforms still in development. Okay, so again, lhost is us. lport, we'll just leave that. rhost is fine. The rport is fine. And again, you can see now when we click on targets, now we have a bunch of different types of targets in here. We're just going to leave this on automatic targeting. And I want to do a reverse connection because it is available. So I'm going to go ahead and click launch. And here you can see that it's actually exploiting. And it's giving it a fingerprint. And here we go. When it starts to say sending stage down here in the console menu, you know that you're pretty much going to get that box, okay? And then it says Meterpreter Session 1 Open 4, and it gives you the options. Now you have a Meterpreter Shell command line here, and we're going to get into that in msfconsole as well. The beautiful thing about Armitage is it gives you the graphical user bells and whistles interface to say, hey, look, this target's compromised. Okay, so you can see that once the target's compromised, the monitor picture up here turns red, it has lightning bolts through it, and all that good stuff. So now the information underneath that says we're running this exploit, completed, and it's running as system. So we're like God on that machine right now. And since that's a domain controller, that's horrible news for them, but great news for us, right? So we basically just took down their main, server, and now we have system level access to that, which is great because now we don't have to escalate privileges and go through all that nonsense. So right clicking on here, you now see a new option inside of the menu, and it's Meterpreter 1. And if you opened a second exploit on this, it would be Meterpreter 2, Meterpreter 3, so on and so forth. Now this we'll get into in post-exploitation, but just to give you a brief overview because I feel it's important to have that before we precursor into the next video. If you go through the sub-menu here of Meterpreter 1, you have access. You can migrate your process. We don't have to because we're system already, but if you wanted to, you could. You migrate it automatically by default to notepad.exe. So if Mr. Sysadmin's looking in on that specific computer for whatever reason, the server in this case, he's not going to see that while we're firing commands and doing tasks on that machine that the system service is hammered to death, right? And it's not maxing out the CPU. So if we were doing it on Notepad, that's less suspicious, like, oh, well, the Notepad process just got stuck. And he's probably not going to kill it. Anyway, so scrolling through here, you got escalate privileges. Now, again, we're already system, so we're not going to, escalate our privileges at all. You have steal tokens, dump hashes, which we will be getting into. This will dump all of the usernames and password hashes for the Windows domain controller. And since we're on the Windows domain controller, this is really, really bad for them, but really, really good for us, right? Because once we do that, we have two options. We can try to crack the, the hashes, and we'll get into that. We would be using Hashcat and John the Ripper and all that good stuff. We could try to crack the hashes, or we can use another attack called pass the hash with ps-exec. Now, the bug that I found in Armitage, and I'm going to make an actual video for Raphael so he understands what the heck I'm talking about, because I posted it on the Facebook, and he doesn't really, he's saying that it works, but we all know that it's not. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Anyway. So you have two methods of doing that, the LSAS method and the registry method. Either one you choose is going to work just fine. So in doing past sessions, you have interact, you can have a command shell on there, the interpreter shell, which we already have down here towards the bottom. You can do, let's see, desktop VNC. It's going to open up a VNC server so you can actually look at their desktop and what they're doing. However, I don't recommend that usually because it will lag their machine a little bit. They might know something's up. Anyway, Explore, you can browse the files, show the processes, log keystrokes, screenshot, webcam shot, and there's post modules. Pivoting, we will get into that in the post exploitation. Basically, pivoting means that you now take that one compromised host and you are running all of your additional attacks to the other hosts on the network through that compromised host. So essentially, you're furthering yourself away from being detected, because everything, if they had like host-based intrusion detection systems or host-based firewalls and stuff like that, they're more than likely going to say, hey, it's cool because you're part of our local subnet. We're not banning you from doing anything, right? So that's the reason behind pivoting, okay? You have an ARP scan, which you would use probably to find out all the other alive hosts on the network if you haven't already. Now, this works great when you're doing a remote pen test and you find a server that's like, I don't know, out on the network, has an open port for a web server or email server. You wind up compromising that, but you want to know how many more machines are behind that network. You can go ahead and do an ARP scan, and it will go ahead and try to find all the other available IP addresses. And you also have the kill option here, the kill menu here, which basically kills your interpreter session. Each time you compromise a host and you take screenshots or video of it or proof somehow or some other way, it's always advised to kill the session after you are done, because somebody could hijack your interpreter session. Being the bad guy could hijack your interpreter session and cause havoc for your customers. So always kill your sessions as you're backing out. One machine at a time, kill your sessions. Okay, so anyway, now you have services again, and scan again, and host again, and all that good stuff. Now, we don't need to attack this one any further, right? Because we've already got this host compromised. We're in. That's it. End of story. Game over for this host. So now 1.4, this one here is our Windows XP Service Pack 3. Well, gee, let's try to go to attack, and let's go over to SMB, because that's always such a fancy one to attack that service there. And you can see MS-08-067 is listed again, MS-10-061 spool SS is listed again. And then we have a pass the hash option, which again, if we had the hashes already from the Windows server, we would right click on this one here and go to pass the hash. And then of course in Armitage, like I said, there's a bug and it will succeed, but it won't show the host is compromised up here on the GUI screen. Anyway, so let's go to this SMB, and let's go ahead and go check all these exploits. So you can see it's checking MS-08-067, and while MS-08-067 said that Windows XP up to Service Pack 3 is vulnerable, again, as I said in the beginning, it could be patched. So it's just going off the port and the service that's running on that port. It's not checking legitimately whether it is patched or not. In this case, on the MS-08-67, I'm sorry, it is checking that if it's patched or not, and it's saying the target is not vulnerable. I know that that machine automatically did some updates before I shut them off, so I know that it was vulnerable at one time, but the updates took care of that vulnerability, right? So again, you may come into a mixed network where you find some targets, you know, their updates may have failed, or maybe the sysadmin is just not doing updates on that specific machine for whatever reason. There might be an update that conflicted with one of their level of business apps that are running on there or something like that. So there are some times where you're going to find that sysadmin intentionally does not do updates on one machine. And 9 out of 10 times, guys, or maybe 8 out of 10 times, guys, to be honest with you, it's on Windows servers, domain controllers for some reason. They don't want to update it because they're afraid that it may break the OS, which Windows updates, let's face it, have been known to do for ages. Will break the system, and if it breaks their server, guess what? Their whole network is down, right? So they don't want to break that, so they're just not doing updates on that server. Bad news again for them, good news for us. Okay. So as you can see here, it went through all of its checks, and there was quite a few here that didn't support check. MS10061 spool SS did not support check. So let's go ahead and, because we know MS08067, which we use to compromise the Windows 2003 server here, is not exploitable on this target machine here. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to fire off the MS10 one. We'll right click on it again, go to Attack, SMB, MS10061. Okay. So let's go ahead and leave all these options in here good. I want to use a reverse connection, and I also want to show advanced options. So scrolling down in here, just to make sure everything is set up correctly. And it looks like everything in here is good. It doesn't give us a domain option to change that or a workstation option to change that. In reading the description, it says the module exploits the RPC service impersonation vulnerability detailed in Microsoft Bulletin MS10-061 by making specific DCE RPC requests to the start dock printer. So spool SS, it's against the printer service. So it doesn't really tell us what versions of Windows are actually exploitable to this. So let's just go ahead and launch this and see if it'll actually work. And you can see it's setting all of its options, which you would be doing in you know, msfconsole, which is pretty easy because you can set globals in there, so it makes things a little bit easier for you. So it says exploit failed, no access. The server responded with this error, status access denied. Okay, so guess what? It wasn't vulnerable to that. Well, we can check other vulnerabilities if we want on here, but again, this is why it's important to have your you know, PDF export or whatever export you did from OpenVOS to see if it did in fact find any vulnerabilities on that machine. So this way you're not wasting an exorbitant amount of time trying each one of these individually or trying to do the check option, which some of them may fail, so you have to inherently do that manually and fire each one. So you can see that there's an Oracle one, there's a Samba one. Let's try the Oracle and just do check against it so we're not actually firing it. It says this target is not exploitable. Okay, so we know that, that's out. Samba, let's go ahead and, even though Samba is probably not going to work for this, let's go ahead and check exploits on that. Well, it says it doesn't support check, so we got to manually go back and do that and actually fire this. So reading in here, you can sometimes determine whether or not it's worth your time to actually fire this exploit over at it. Is it worth the fact of maybe being caught? Module exploits a command execution vulnerability in the Samba versions 3.0.20 through 3.0.25 RC3 when using a non-default username map script. Okay, so it doesn't really tell us that what it's going against, so we can really just go ahead and click show advanced options, just make sure if there's anything that we might change that might change our ability to actually exploit this. And we could probably try to change the domain if you wanted to. We'll just name this acmeinc.local, which is what that domain controller, or which that is part of the domain. If you had usernames and passwords, you could try to put them in over here. We don't have any usernames and passwords yet, so let's just go ahead and click launch. And you see exploit failed. There's no, it's not vulnerable to that exploit. Alright, so we basically tried almost all of them, guys. Again, using ps exec would use a pass-to-hash attack, so you'd have to dump the hashes from the server or another compromised machine and try to pass those along the domain to the other workstations or servers in the domain. Now, generally speaking, when a Windows domain controller is on a network and everybody's connecting to that, it uses LDAP and the back end of Active Directory to store usernames and passwords so you can authenticate to the actual domain controller and say, hey, yeah, I'm part of the domain, give me an IP address, give me DNS, give me shared folders, give me, directory access to certain things, give me printers, give me all that good stuff, right? So when you're using pass-to-hash, you're basically dumping all those hashes that were in the domain controller and trying to pass it along to the workstations in hopes that the administrator, which they normally do, adds themselves to each machine so they can remote and fix things, whatever, or give the other local user different privileges, so on and so forth. So you want to try to pass the hash across that, and it should show up as a compromised machine, and you do have the option to set a payload like a reverse TCP interpreter shell, and that machine would in turn be compromised. Again, we'll get into all this in post-exploitation, but I just want to touch on it so you guys know what you're looking at. So obviously, again, we could see this dialog box here doesn't have a close option or any kind of minimize option. So again, right click on it and just go to close. So it looks like we're not getting access to this target just yet. However, if we use the pass-to-hash attack, there is a chance that we can still get in. Now, this is basically just a remote attack. If we did a client-side attack where we couldn't get in remotely any other way, like there was no other services that were vulnerable, we might use a client-side attack. And a client-side attack is using something like a social engineering toolkit, tricking a user to download a payload or basically an exploit and a payload from us. So that uses a little bit of social engineering as well. Let's move on to our Windows 7 host. Again, if you go under the attack menu, you can see here that it says MS03026DCOM. Well, let's go ahead and click on that and let's read the description. Now this is where it's going to come in handy. Okay, so it gives us some operating systems that are vulnerable to this. It says this module can exploit the English version of Windows NT 4.0 Service Pack 3-6A, Windows 2000, Windows XP, and Windows 2003 all in one request. Well, we know this is a Windows 7 machine. We're not really working with any of that stuff, right? And if you go down to your targets option, that's the only options that are selected. So we're not even going to bother firing that one because guess what? It's probably not going to work. So right click again, go to attack. So the DCERPC is out. Oracle, let's not worry about that one here. Samba, this one here. So now it has an MS08067. But here's the thing, guys. If you went to here and you went to hosts, since that's the only one that's selected, and attacks and find attacks, it's going to go ahead and query exploits for that as well. So just to do that, just to make sure that we're not missing anything here, and it doesn't look like we're missing anything. Okay, so again, MS08067, if we click on that, we know that that's only working for Windows XP and Windows 2003. So let's close that. And it doesn't look like we really have any other thing on the way in. Now, you can always double check what exploits are available for Windows 7 by searching online or something like that, but again, reference to your OpenVOS PDF. So opening up Armitage again, the other thing we could try to do on here besides a client-side attack is again a pass-to-hash attack to see if we can log into this machine and compromise it. Once we do that, if we opened up an interpreter shell, guess what? We have access on that system, right? So we could take screenshots, we could do key logs, we can, escalate privileges, there's a whole myriad of stuff we'll get to in post-exploitation. But this just gives you a brief overview of how Armitage actually works, compromising one host. Now, using this same knowledge, we're going to try to compromise hosts inside of msfconsole. Alright guys, so that pretty much takes care of Armitage. We're going to get into msfconsole quickly. The first thing you need to know is you always need to go to the Applications menu, Kali Linux, and then System Services, and start Metasploit Community Pro services. Since we've already used Armitage and this is the same video, those services are already started for us. So simply to start msfconsole, just in a command line or in a terminal, type in msfconsole and hit enter. And it may take about a minute or so to actually load it up. The other thing worth noting is every time you use Metasploit, you should probably do an update, MSF update. You don't have to be in Metasploit console to do that. The MSF console, you don't have to be in there to do that. You can actually just issue that from a command line and it'll do it for you. So when you start it up, you'll see here that it'll tell you the version here on the bottom and how many exploits, auxiliary modules, post modules, payloads, encoders, and NOPs are in the database. Okay, so I haven't updated mine in a while because this is just the lab box here. And since we're working with older Windows machines, I know it's going to be just fine. So let me just clear this out here. Okay, so there's a couple of things that you should know right off the bat. Okay, first things first is you have to do, if you wanted to use like the import function that we use in Armitage, there's a couple of different ways to do that. We want to import our Nmap scan results. So when you're in your msfconsole, if you ever need help, just type in the help command and it's going to give you a list of options that you can use at the core to do things that you need to do. So you can notice a couple things we're going to go over here is set and setg. Set is used to set parameters or options inside of a payload or an exploit, a scanner, so on and so forth. Setg is to set global parameters, so if we're working with just one specific target IP address or range, we can set that as a global parameter. Show always displays modules of a given type or all modules, and we're going to get into that as well. Also, you have a couple of things down here with DB export to export it like a report type of deal, which, as I discussed, is kind of cumbersome because there's no XSL file for it to be converted to an HTML document. So that's something I'm working on writing, like I said. DB Nmap is the built-in Nmap scanning module for that. And then you have DB import, which imports your scan results file from any other scanners, specifically Nmap. So in order to do the import, we have to first check to make sure that there's nothing in our database. If you notice in Armitage, first thing we did was clear our database out because we don't want to get that confused with something else that we might have been scanning before, so on and so forth. So in order to do that, you just have to type in hosts and hit enter. Now, as you can see here, I already have some stuff in here from doing some demonstrations a little while ago. If you have stuff in there you want to clear it, it's just hosts tac D for delete. You can delete individual hosts by just typing in its IP address. So if, for instance, we just want to delete the 1.2 one, we just type in 192.168.1.2 and hit enter. And it says it deleted one host down here at the bottom, and it tells you the host it deleted. And then if you issued the host command again, we would see we only have in here 2. Now I want to delete the whole database because I want to start fresh, right? So it's host tac D for delete all. And it deletes 2 hosts, the 2 hosts that were left over. Again, if we type in host, we can make sure that our database is actually clear. Okay, so let me clear the screen out here. So we talked about learning how to use setg. Now setg sets global parameters for you to use. So if you're working against one specific target IP, or if you're doing an internal audit and you're working towards an entire subnet range or something like that, you can always use the setg parameter. We'll get to that here in just a minute. First we want to do is the DB import, because we want to import our Nmap scan that we did before, right? So it's DB underscore import and the path to where the file actually resides. So that's root, and then that's Acme Inc., and then that was freshscan.xml. So just hit enter after that, and you can see that it's importing all of our hosts for us here. Now, again, we're going to have to go through and remove some of these hosts, so to save a little bit of time, because I know a couple of them are, like 1.1 is the router again, and 1.3 is this machine that we're working off of here. Okay, so let's clear this out. Now let's go ahead and issue the host command again, and you can see now that it's imported all of our hosts. However, as I said, it's not reading correctly on the operating system, and as before, we know 1.9 is actually a Windows 2003 box, so it didn't really import it correctly in terms of the OS name or any kind of service packs or things like that. Alright, so first things first, I want to remove the hosts that we're not going to scan, so I'm just going to host-d 192.168.1.1, and I'm going to do the same thing for .3. And then I'm just going to issue the host command again. Alright, so now we have our 3 target machines in here. So the thing is that you want to do what we did in Armitage and use the MSF scan to better enumerate the operating systems and the service packs available to them. So those are actually located in a directory structure, and I'm going to put a link in the description to learn everything there is to learn about msfconsole, so you guys have a guide or a reference to go to if you get a little confused. Okay, so auxiliary holds, as we've seen in Armitage, the directory tree structure. Auxiliary holds some of your scanners, fuzzers, DDoS attackers, brute forcers, things like that. Scanners that we want to use in terms of what the MSF scan was all about is actually called SMB_version, because we want to find out what version these operating systems are actually, the true versions of the operating systems are. So anytime that you want to find an actual scanner, exploit, vulnerability, payload, whatever that you're looking for, and you know the name of it, you can use the locate command. So that's locate, and then I'm looking for specifically SMB version. And now you can see it tells me that it's in auxiliary, scanner, SMB version. That's the scanner that I want to use. But what if I didn't know the name of the actual scanner that I was looking to use, right? So I could do show auxiliary, and it's going to show me everything in the auxiliary directory tree structure. And it may take a minute or maybe a little less depending on how fast your system is, because it is literally querying and doing like a directory command on everything that is in the auxiliary folder. Now you can see here it scrolls back everything that's under auxiliary. Okay, so we want to look for SMB because we know that we're looking to do some Windows stuff. And if we look here, we only have a few options for SMB scanners starting at the very top here. SMB pipe auditor, things like that. Well, SMB PSE exec, okay, SMB2, and we are looking for SMB version. So right here, it's under auxiliary as the top directory, then it's in scanner, SMB version. Okay, so let's just clear out the screen here. Alright, so first we want to use that actual tool. So the command is simple. Use auxiliary scanner, SMB, and then SMB_version. Okay, and you can always use tab as autocomplete. You can also arrow up, arrow down if you want to, go through your commands that you've already issued and just do it again. So I'm going to hit enter. Now you can see that the screen has changed a little bit here, and the SMB version is now highlighted in red. So that's actually what we're actually in right now. So we want to know what options are available to us in this script that we're using. So simply type in show options, and it'll tell you all the options. Now our hosts, SMB domain, workgroup, SMB pass, user, thread, so on and so forth. We can change all that. We want to type in our host. Now we're going to type in a range, right? So we want to go from .2 to .9. So it's simply to set an option. It's set and then the option our hosts, and you can use autocomplete on that just to make sure you're getting in the right syntax. Okay, and then it's 192.168.1.2 through .9. Now you don't have to type in a dot before 9. Keep that in mind. And hit enter. Now if you did show options again, you should see that it reflected. And here it is. Okay, so our changes have been made. And now simply we want to run the scanner. So what's the command? Run. Very simple, right? Now you can see it's going through, and it's going to do a determination on the operating system and the service pack available to it. Now it's not always 110% accurate, but it's pretty damn close most of the time. And you can see it's going to take a little while depending on the IP address range you're scanning, your internet speed, your computer speed, all those things again, guys, factor into any of the scans that we ever do. So keep that in mind if things are going a little bit slow. Okay, so it said scanned 8 out of 8 hosts, 100% complete, auxiliary module execution completed. Fantastic. So now if we issue the host command again, now we have a little bit more accurate depiction of what our machines actually look like. So now 1.9, instead of reporting as it was Windows XP, guess what? It's Windows Server 2003, Service Pack 0, right? So I know 1.3 is my box here, so again, I just want to remove that with host-d and then 192.168.1.3. Okay. Clear this screen again, type in hosts. Okay, so now we know what we're working with here, right? So let's get back to our setg command, because now we know that we're up against a Windows 2003 server, and we want to target that first and foremost, because hey, that's the meat and potatoes of everything, right? If you get access on that system, depending on what type of access or level of access we get, we can pretty much own the rest of the network, right? So that's going to be our target machine we want to go after first. All right. So now, if you think that a target network has high level security, you probably want to go a little bit lower level. You want to start with a workstation and try to work your way up to getting to the server. Okay, but since this is our lab network, I know I just want to go after the Windows domain controller first, and then try to own everything else after that. So anytime you want to get out of whatever module or scanner or whatever you're using, just type in back, and that'll get you out of it. Well, let's clear this out again, and let's go ahead and issue our host command so we know what we're up against. Alright, so getting back to setg, the command to set those is simply setg, and then if you just hit enter, it's going to show you that there's no global entries in there right now. So we want to do setg rhosts, and we want to set that to 192.168.1.9 because that's the machine that we're after, right? And if we do setg again by itself, we can see that the rhost is now set to 192.168.1.9. Beautiful thing. So, clear this out again. Now, we know already that MS08067, that Windows 2003 server, is actually vulnerable to that. Now, if you weren't sure where an exploit actually lives or a payload actually lives, you can always do that locate command again. So if we did locate MS08_067, you can see that it's in exploits, Windows, SMB, MS08067. So whenever we want to use something, a command is always going to be use. And when you want to do a payload, you're going to set the payload to use when that exploit actually happens. So keep that in mind. It's use to use a scanner payload, use to use a scanner, an exploit, so on and so forth, set to set the payload that's going to be working with that exploit. So we want to set up our exploit first. So we use exploits, exploit, Windows, SMB, following our path up here from our locate command, MS08067.API. Hit enter. Okay, so now you can see that you're in this actual exploit. So again, show options. Okay, well now you could see that our rhost is already filled in for us, right? Because of the setg command, the global parameter that we put in. We don't want to change our port, but you can if you want to. And how you would do that is just simply set. To set an option, you just type in set, not setg, and then you do r port, whatever it is, and then I'm just going to leave this the same, but just to show you how it works, 445. And now, of course, if you did show options again, you can see that it's taken it, it's in there already. But generally speaking, you leave the R port alone because that's what the exploit is actually set up to work off of, so you don't really want to change that. Unless, of course, your client has changed that service to a different port, then of course you're going to want to have to do that. So anyway, now we have our exploit set up. That's the exploit we're going to use. So now we need to pick our payload. I love Windows interpreter shells. I mean, they're just awesome, and they give you so much power and control over the system once you've compromised it. That's all I seem to tend to stick to. Now, there is a Meterpreter version for Linux. If you want to learn more about Meterpreter, you can go on a couple of different websites. I'll put one in the description as well if you want to go on that. Or, of course, you can always go to learnnetsec.com and check out our forums, ask us about it over there. Okay, so now we want to use, or I'm sorry, we want to set the payload that we're going to use. So I want to locate my Meterpreter. Oops. Payloads. And you can see it scrolls past a bunch, guys, right? So there's going to be scripts, Meterpreter. Then, of course, you're going to go up here and there's going to be modules, payloads, stages. There's a bunch of stuff in here. So you may want to take some time getting familiar with the directory structure and where it's actually at, what you want to use. But we want to use something for Windows, so we're going to look through this whole line of stuff here for something that would go into Windows. Well, Pro version, that's only for the Pro. So here we can go data Meterpreter, so on and so forth. But I happen to know where that is already from, just remembering it pretty much. So I'm going to get out of here and I'm just going to clear the screen. So I want to set payload, okay, and then so you're telling it to set the payload that you want to use, and then it's in Windows. Sometimes it takes a minute if you're doing autocomplete. So it's Windows Interpreter, and then it's reverse TCP I want to use. Now there's a bunch of different options. You can use reverse TCP, reverse or bind TCP. You can use reverse DNS, so on and so forth. I like reverse TCP as my default because it seems to work the best for me anyway. Okay, so once I do that, I hit set, and now it's set the Windows payload for that. Okay, so once you do that and you do show options again, you're going to go ahead and find where the payload options are. So you want to set lhost for your local host to your IP address of your Kali Linux machine. In this case, it's 1.99. Now keep in mind, for L port, if you're using the default port 4444, if you're behind a NAT device like a router or something like that, you want to do the port forwarding, of course, if you're doing something over the WAN. Of course, if you're local, then you don't have to worry about that. Or you could put your Kali Linux machine up on the DMZ and not have to worry about any of that. So I'm going to set my lhost to 1.99. Now if I do show options again, you can see that everything is set for me. So I've set my exploit, and I've set the rhost, which was set by setg, the global parameters. And now in payload options, I did my reverse TCP. Now again, you can use setg to set your lhost as well if you wanted to. So simple setg lhost 192.168.1.99, or attacking machine. Okay, and then of course setg, you can now see that it's both set. Okay, in any case, now we're ready to fire our script. But do we really want to fire it yet, or do we want to check to make sure that that host is actually vulnerable? So simply, if you want to check, just type in check and hit enter. And here we go. It says the target is vulnerable. Now this is much the same as you see the output in Armitage in the console windows. So I know this target's vulnerable. I want to go ahead and fire it. So I just simply type in exploit tac J to background it, and go ahead and hit enter. Once you see, as I said, sending stage, you know that you're almost guaranteed to be in. Next line you see is interpreter session 1 opened on our local computer here on port 4444, and then it's to the target machine on port 1739. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, oh great, but it looks like the screen is frozen. It's not. Just hit enter, and that's going to drop you back to your command line. Now, it says that it opened a session, but how do we find out what sessions that we have open? Simply type in the sessions command and hit enter, and you can see that the session ID 1 is Meterpreter, and it is running as system at the target IP address of 1.9. Okay, well now, great, we know we have a session open, but how do we interact with that? How do we get into the Meterpreter shell? Very simple. There's no right-click menus here like there was in Armitage. So it's sessions, tac I for interact, and then the session ID, which is 1 in our case. Okay, so now we're dropped into a Meterpreter shell. Well, that's all well and good, but how do we know what to do here? There's no right-click menu. Well, simple. Type in help. That'll give you a list of all the commands that you can actually do and their top-level meaning, like privilege, elevate commands, get system. Well, we know we're already system, so we don't have to worry about that. You got hash dump to dump the password hashes. You've got time stomp to manipulate the mace attributes. You have a bunch of different stuff in here, like get desktop. You could do start a keylogger in there. You could do screenshots. You know, like for instance, if I wanted to do a screenshot right now, I just type in screenshot, hit enter, and it tells you the screenshot was saved to root EDIGW, whatever. It makes up some random name. So now if we went into our computer and we went into file system and then we went into root, well, we can see that there's a JPEG here. So open with image viewer. It may just take a second here. My system's lagging a little bit. Okay, well there's the screenshot that I just took. So it's on its idle screen, so we know nobody's sitting in front of it right now, right? So that's pretty awesome. And then again, I mean, you know, you have a bunch of different commands here. You can record their microphone, their webcam. I mean, you can list webcams if there was one attached. I don't have one attached to that because it's a virtual machine, but you could drop into a system shell. You can modify the remote registry. You could reboot the computer. You could kill a process. You can list the processes here with PS. You can get privs, get PID. So if we want to do get PID, looks like current PID is 920. If we did PS to list all the processes, you would look for 920 in there for process ID. And here we are right here. So we are under the svchost.exe, and that's where we're at. Okay, so again, issuing the help command, just to go through some more of the other parameters here. You can do an upload a file directory. You can remove directory. You know, you can do basically, you can cat some directories of a file, stuff like that. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff you can do here. Migrate processes, pretty much everything you can do, and a little bit more from Armitage, the way with the right-click menu and all that good stuff. Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of stuff you could do in here, guys. But that's pretty much it for using Meterpreter. If you want to get out of Meterpreter and kill your session at the very same time, you can always do exit, right? So those sessions are closed, and if we type in sessions again, you can see that there's no active sessions. So let me just get out of here. I want to go ahead and just do this quickly so you guys see how fast, once you get used to it, see how fast it actually works. So again, I want to list my hosts. I want to go after 1.9. I've done my set G parameters already, so I know that that's good. I want to use exploit Windows SMB MS08 067. I want to show options, and it looks like my options were set in there. And of course, I want to use my Meterpreter shell. So it's set payload Windows Meterpreter reverse TCP show options. My L host is already set because I did the set G. Now I just want to do check vulnerable. I want to do exploit J. There you go, my session's opened. Now let's say if you list your sessions and you're just like, alright, good, I got a shell on that box, really need to do anything else. You can always do your kill command in session. So it's sessions tac K and then the session ID, which is in our case 2. Sessions closed. Sessions again, no active sessions. We're all done. And we can back out of here and clear, and we can exit msfconsole, and we are back to normal, right? So that's pretty much it, guys, for using msfconsole in place of Armitage. Now, Armitage might be easier for some beginners because it is GUI based. It's kind of point and click and kill. Whereas some of our seasoned veteran guys might be more comfortable with msfconsole. And like I said, I've noticed a few bugs inside of Armitage that, you know, like with PSE exec and pass the hash, which didn't show as a compromised host. Meanwhile, I did the same thing in msfconsole the same exact way, and sure enough, it gave me a reverse Meterpreter shell on that box. So meanwhile, while there wasn't any other active exploits as we've seen for like the Windows XP Service Pack 3 box in Armitage or the Windows 7 box in Armitage, I was able to actually use pass the hash and PS exec and actually compromise those machines and open Meterpreter sessions on those as well. So that's pretty much it, guys. Make sure to give us a thumbs up on the video if you like it, you've learned something. Make sure to subscribe to our channel here. Also make sure to check out our website, learnnetsec.com, join the forums, and hang out with us, chat with us, ask questions. We're there to help and learn from each other. Follow us on Twitter, check us out on Facebook. All the links are in the description for everything we discussed here today. And thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.